my name's Emily and I'm a children's speech and language therapist at Chesterfield Royal Hospital. Today I'm going to talk to you a little bit about discriminating between two different sounds and the importance of this in speech sound work. And this is something that your speech and language therapist might have advised you to work on with your child if they're having particular difficulties with some of their speech sounds. It's really important that we work on listening and being able to discriminate between different sounds before we start thinking about production. And that's because if your child isn't quite hearing the difference between two sounds, it's going to be really difficult for them to copy you and produce the sound themselves. And it's worth noting that if they can't discriminate between the two different sounds and they're struggling with this, it's not always linked to hearing. Sometimes it is just their brain, it just isn't quite processing the sounds correctly, but it is something that can be worked on and developed. So there are a couple of stages when it comes to listening and discriminating between sounds, and we're going to look at these and talk through these more today. So the first stage is, can the child listen between two different sounds when they're said in isolation and identify which sound has been said? The second stage would be for the child to listen and discriminate between sounds at the beginning or ends of silly words, and silly words are words with a vowel. The third stage would be for the child to listen and to discriminate between two sounds at the start or at the end of real words. And finally, the fourth stage would be for the child to silently sort pictures based on the sound at the beginning or at the end of words without hearing the words first. And we're going to talk through these stages in a little bit more detail today. So your speech and language therapist should have informed you which sounds your child is having difficulties with and which sounds you need to target. But in today's example, let's say that the child is having difficulties with s and they're replacing this sound with d. So for example, instead of saying sun, they might say done. So the first thing that we would need to do is to check and to work on whether they can discriminate between the two different sounds in isolation. So whether they can hear the difference between s and d when they're said on their own. So I like to use Jolly Phonics pictures to do this, but you can use different phonics pictures or the phonics pictures that you're using in school. So for example, read, write, ink pictures. So to get started, if your child has never seen these pictures before, you might need to introduce them to them. So you might start off by saying this one is s, and you can use an action as well to support them. And for d, I might say something like this one is d, d, d. And again, I might use an action to support them. Once you've introduced them and your child is familiar with the pictures, then it is simply a case of asking them to show you which sound is which. So I might say which one is s, which one is d, d, d. And again, to start with, I might use some actions as I'm saying the sound. So which one is d, 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 which one is s. But eventually we would want to fade those actions out because then it's not acting as a prompt for them. Now that seems pretty boring, just asking your child to point to which sound is which. So we do want to make this fun and enjoyable for them. Otherwise, they're probably not going to want to do it that much. So it's really important that we play games at the same time as doing this. So as some game ideas, a good one to do is Pop-Up Pirate. Everybody is familiar with that. And you could give them a sword and they could use their sword to point to each picture before they put it into the barrel. Or you could roll a ball to each sound. Can you roll the ball to s? Can you roll the ball to d? Or you could throw a beanbag towards it. You could play turn-taking games such as bingo, and on every turn you give them a sound to identify. Once your child is pretty good at identifying and discriminating between two sounds in isolation, then it's time to start using the sounds in silly words. And silly words consist of a consonant and a vowel. So it could be something like sue, see, saw, or dee, do, da. And you can use the sound at the beginning or at the end of words. So if it was at the end, it might be something like ard, ood, ease. Your speech and language therapist will tell you whether you need to be listening for the sound at the beginning of words or at the end of words. So as an example, and remembering that our child is having difficulties producing s and they're swapping it with d, and they're having difficulties discriminating between these two sounds, I might ask them, which one is at the beginning of Sue? Which one is at the beginning of do? Which one's at the beginning of C? Which one's at the beginning of D? Which one's at the beginning of door? And again, it's pretty boring if you're not playing games at the same time, so do remember to keep it really fun. Once your child is really good at discriminating between the two sounds as part of a silly word, so with a vowel, either at the end or at the beginning of the word, then it's time to start working on discriminating between the two sounds at the beginning or end of a real word. And again, your speech and language therapist will advise you whether you need to look at the sounds at the beginning or at the end of the word. In today's example, we're going to stick to using the sounds at the beginning of a word. And to start with, I might choose two words which sound really different to each other. So I might say, which one's at the beginning of sand? Which one's at the beginning of deep? And once your child is pretty good with that, then it's time to start introducing some words which sound pretty similar to each other. So I might say, which one's at the beginning of sun? Which one's at the beginning of done? And as you can hear, those words sound pretty similar, bar the initial letter. And we call those minimal pairs. If you're struggling to think of some, your speech and language therapist can send you a list of minimal pairs that you can use. When you're working on discriminating between sounds at the beginning of real words or end of real words, you might also be sent some pictures like these ones from your speech and language therapist. And you can use these pictures with your child and encourage them to sort them out. So for example, we might say, what's at the beginning of dad? What's at the beginning of sad? What's at the beginning of suck? What's at the beginning of duck? And the final stage of listening and discriminating between sounds is for the child to be able to silently sort these pictures out. So at this point, we're not saying the word for them. We're not saying what it is on the picture. We're just expecting them to say it to themselves in their head and silently sort the pictures out. So once your child can discriminate between different sounds at all of those different stages and they can silently sort those pictures out, then you're ready to work on some production. And in this example, we would be working on the production of S. It's important to remember that every child is different. Some children will fly through all of those stages really quickly, and others they'll need a little bit more practice at. So a few top tips to remember then. It's really important that your child can discriminate between different sounds in words. Otherwise, it's going to be really difficult for them to copy and produce a sound that they're having difficulties with. Number 2, remember to keep it fun. Play games at the same time. Otherwise, your child is just not going to want to do it, and speech work, sound work can be a little bit boring sometimes. We do have another video available with games to play during speech sound work, so if you need some more ideas, please go and have a watch of that video as well. Number 3 is if your speech and language therapist has advised you to work on discriminating between sounds in isolation, make sure you're not running before you can walk, and just stay at that stage until you feel that your child is really consistent with the stage that they're at. You can use actions to support them, but try and fade those actions out. Remember to work through all of the different stages as a bit of a process, and don't jump from discriminating at isolation level to discriminating within words. Make sure you include those silly words as well. If your speech and language therapist has advised you to work on discriminating between sounds at word level at the beginning of real words and you've not gone through some of the other stages before, then that's still absolutely fine. It just means that your speech and language therapist has already checked those different stages and they probably feel that the child is fine at those. So start with where your speech therapist has asked you to start. And finally, just because I've used the sounds d and s in today's example, doesn't mean that you have to stick to d and s. Use whichever sounds your speech and language therapist has advised you to work on. So you might use t and k, for example, or you might use s and t. It doesn't matter which sounds you've been advised to work on, the process is still exactly the same. So if you have any questions, please do get in touch with us. We would be more than happy to help. We also have some information on our website and some other videos showing you games that you can play during speech sound work. So please have a look at those as well. And when you think that your child has achieved the targets and you're ready for a review, please do get in touch with us.